then we thought actually it was time to set up our own place, and we heard about this residence bar in Chelsea Cloisters.
Charlie Gilkes.
Charlie Gilkes. Charlie Gilkes.
Founder of Inception Group.
Mr Fogg's.
Cahoots.
Maggie's. Bunga Bunga.
The money paid as entrance, and the venue would take the money paid at the bar. Eventually we took these two guys out for a tour around nightclubs, which was one of the most awkward evenings of my life. And that's 15 years ago this year. That's how Inception Group started. When something's not getting traction and it's not getting momentum, don't keep spending all your time flogging it. Amazon, they were doing conferences in London, and then they rent one of our venues.
Today we've got an inspirational and fascinating entrepreneur, Charlie, who is the founder of Inception Group, Mr Fogg's, Cahoots, Maggie's, and also nightclub Bunga Bunga. Actually, and going through your journey, I'm really excited to see how you have come a long way and when you started. You started off really young, so really excited. Charlie, tell us a little bit about your early life, how you started. You started around 2 or 3 years old, your entrepreneurial mindset.
That's a bit of a stretch, 2 or 3 years old. But no, I'm kind of the youngest of 5. Probably was quite a precocious kid. Growing up, wanting to keep up with my older brothers and sisters, and yeah, I guess I was always kind of thinking about how I could make a few extra quid. And my first kind of, I guess, entrepreneurial dalliance was when I was 13, and I had this idea of, how could I get all my friends together one sort of Christmas holidays. And I rang a nightclub and asked. I left a message on the answering machine, and I said, "Can I hire this nightclub for the night?" And they rang back asking for Mrs. Gilkes because my voice hadn't broken at the time. And we hired this nightclub, and we turned off the cigarette machines because everyone was 13, and there were no drinks for sale because, well, there were drinks for sale, but it was orange juice. And people paid a £30 ticket, and I made £200 profit, which at the age of 13 is life-changing money. And I think from then I was thinking, how can I do more of this? And so that's kind of how it started. But for me, really, it was I took a year out between school and uni, and suddenly the business model became a bit more interesting because people were buying. Because you had to pay a big hire fee. If you're not taking money at the bar, you had to pay a hire fee for the club, basically. Where suddenly the model changed when I was 18 because people were spending money at the bar. So there was a direct arrangement with these places that I would take the money paid as entrance, and the venue would take the money paid at the bar. And so my parents quite rightly said, if you want to go travelling, you can do that, but you've got to pay for it yourself. And so the only paid employment I've ever had was actually for Tiffany's. So I signed up for Tiffany's, and I thought I was going to be on the shop floor, but I was in the packaging department in East Greenwich, and there was only so many blue boxes that I could ribbon. And after 10 days of that, I thought, I'm never going to pay for these airfares. So I approached a nightclub, which I was introduced to by my older brother, and kind of that's how we started.
Awesome. You don't come from an entrepreneurial background, so how did you tell us a little bit about your family?
Yeah, I mean, my dad's a doctor, very risk averse. The only time I've really heard him ringing in my ear was during COVID, because he's always saying, get a profession. He's a dermatologist, so he loves a recession, because he says people itch more. And, he was always saying, get a proper, I got a degree because of him, so I made sure I went to Edinburgh, I read politics at Edinburgh, so I got the degree with him in mind. I don't know, I don't know what it was. I think it was just kind of innate in me, wanting to do my own thing. And I was inspired by people like growing up, like Richard Branson was always the guy that I really held on a pedestal. Read his book, Losing My Virginity, really young, and he was the guy that really inspired me. And more recently, kind of entrepreneurs in my sector, the guy Danny Meyer is a US entrepreneur, the guy who founded Union Square Hospitality, and he started Shake Shack more recently, and he was his book Setting the Table is a book we give every manager. But yeah, I know it wasn't something I grew up around, but it was something that was kind of innate, I guess.
You went to Edinburgh University. What did you do when you finished? Because a lot of people, they get degrees, and they suddenly want to become entrepreneurs. So you did that purely for your family, or did you build some skills studying?
So I started doing these club nights in my year out, I ran a Tuesday night at a nightclub, and there was this guy called Duncan who ran a Thursday night, and we were kind of arch rivals. And the week before Christmas, we knew that every night would be busy. So I booked the Wednesday night through the owner, and he booked it through the manager. And they suddenly realised they're double booked, and we were going to have to work together. They had to break it to us that, Charlie, you and Duncan are going to have to do this night together. And we were both very unhappy about it. And this guy waltzed in, and he suddenly had a guy clicking on the door for every time someone paid to get in. And I realised the club had been fleecing me for the last year, and he was incredibly practical. So suddenly spoke to him, and Duncan's been my business partner now for 22 years, so we own everything 50-50. And that was the start of our relationship, really, with work. And I think we, from that moment, thought we could do more and more. We took over bigger venues. We did like Ministry of Sound and Hammersmith Palais. And then we got to the point, so this is still on my year out, we got to the point where we thought we'd eventually like to have our own place. So I used to go to Edinburgh University for the whole 4 years. I did 3 days there. I used to go up every single Monday morning. I used to do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday at Edinburgh. Every single Wednesday afternoon, I came back to London and ran the business. So I think it really showed me you can get a degree and run a business at the same time. And I think something people don't say enough is that the time to start a business is when you're young. Because actually when you're older, you've got so much more to lose. It's so much harder. So I took those risks early, before I had children, before I had to do the sensible thing. And I think whilst I was at Edinburgh, we then decided it was time to open our own place. So we wanted to open our own nightclub, and we heard about this hotel called the Sloane Square Hotel, and that these two owners, they were in their 70s, and they had a basement which we knew used to be licensed. So we approached them and said, look, you've got a basement here. We'd love to set up a nightclub. And they looked at us like we were something that sort of the cat had brought in. They said, no, we're in the business of sleep. We're not interested. And we said, look, honestly, this is a golden opportunity for you guys. And I think they're just wondering why these sort of 22-year-olds were being so persistent, full-time students. And looking back on it, we did some quite weird things. Like I found out his birthday and sent him a Mont Blanc pen on his birthday to get his attention, which is kind of almost stalkerish, but we just did not take no for an answer. And then he said he was very worried because we were going to wake people up in his hotel. But we then said, well, we can put lead line insulation in. And unbeknown to him, we got people into the basement to do this whole soundproofing plan. And then we said, this can guarantee that there'll be no noise bleed. And we can also guarantee that if there's any person who complains from your hotel, we'll refund them out of our P&L. And then eventually we took these two guys out for a tour around nightclubs, which was one of the most awkward evenings of my life, with their driver, them holding we went to Bougie and a few others, and they absolutely hated it. But I think they saw the money-making opportunity, and we did a joint venture. So we opened a nightclub in 2006 called Kits, so I was still doing my finals. And it was pretty stressful doing my finals, opening my own place. But got off to a great start, and we had the perception of being owners, even though we didn't own anything. It was a joint venture. They put in all the money, we ran it, and then at the end of the year, we split the money, we split the profits. And that gave us that leg up, that gave us that opportunity to learn how to operate something. Because we only very vaguely knew, well, vodka's kind of 10, 11 quid, you sell it for 100 plus, you must be making money, but we didn't know about anything in the middle. And it was almost like business school, and these two hoteliers were actually very old school, but they taught us so much because they were so detail orientated, their budgeting processes. And we did that for 3 years, and then we thought actually it was time to set up our own place, and we heard about this residence bar in Chelsea Cloisters, which is a strange building in Sloane Square, and the bar was being touted on the market for a long time. I'd recently seen this idea of a speakeasy bar in New York, and no one had done one in London before, a sort of secret bar. And we approached them, and there weren't any other options. There's a big property mogul owns this building, and he'd had it on the market for 3 years. No one had touched it, had no on-street presence. It was a small bar hidden away within a building, but with a good license. and we sort of thought this would be a great speakeasy, a secret bar with a doorbell. You could ring the doorbell, look through the little shutters, and we said, yeah, we'll take it. And he, looking back, I mean, he made us personally guarantee that lease, which was just completely nuts. But the rent was cheap. I remember our lawyer ringing us and saying, "You made a mistake. You put £5,000 a year. I think you mean a month." And they're like, no, a year. So it started at 5, 10 the second year, 15 in the third, 20 in the fourth, 25 in the fifth, and that's our first bar, Bart's, and that's 15 years ago this year, and that's how Inception Group started. So over the last 15 years, we've never taken a penny of investment. So every venue has funded the next. So we opened our first venue on £20,000, and that funded the next, and that funded the next, and we'll do sales of 35 million this year, from that initial £20,000 investment. So it's been a hell of a journey to get there.
Brilliant. In terms of, I love going to Bart's. I absolutely love it. There's a sense of community in Bart's that I absolutely love. I went there with my girlfriend, and everybody was so friendly. And so, tell me what was being done before Bart's. Was there other people trying to do the same, and was it successful? And how did you manage to be successful?
It was interesting, when we opened Bart's, I looked at every bar that was in a 10-minute walk away, and I printed out pictures of them. And I stuck them all on a big sheet of cardboard, and I showed a few people, and I said, and this was about 11 different venues, and I said, "What venue is that?" And no one commented these are 11 different venues, because they were all buying the same furniture through a company called Andy Thornton. They had the same tea light candles, they were using the same glassware. My idea with Bart's, it was just going to be completely different, and we went to Kempton Market, which I still love going to. We bought loads of teapots, old teacups, old jam jars, and that whole teapot and cocktails things is now quite mainstream, hadn't been done at that point. And we did it on an absolute shoestring, but we were just determined that Bart's, if you stuck that photo onto the page, it would just ping out. And it was the worst time possible to be setting up your own bar. It was 2009, 50 pubs a week were closing, BlackRock had happened, the economy was tanking. But interestingly, like when the 1929 crash happened, when Prohibition was around, those sorts of times are a seismic shift of how people want to go out, and suddenly the big flashy £1 million refits weren't in vogue. So we started with really reasonable prices, and if you're a regular and that sense of community, you got given a key card. You couldn't buy one, and it let you in. I actually remember speaking to the hotel lock operator to get this, because I just wanted a hotel key card lock, and they were incredibly excited about our order until we ordered one, which is on the front door. And that lets you in, and then if you're a real regular, you get your own tankard above the bar. But I actually remember on our first Christmas, what was lovely about Bart's is people used to come on their own, so lots of regulars would just turn up, and they knew who would be there, they knew the bartenders, and tragically on our first Christmas, one of our regulars was at his office party in Canary Wharf and got run over and killed. And I went to the funeral, and I remember sitting in that church, and I remember looking around and spotting about 30 Bart's regulars and thinking, wow, this is a real sense of community. Very different to the community you get in a nightclub, which you don't really get. And actually I immediately felt like the bar scene was something much more special and much more the kind of thing business we wanted to create.
Awesome. I'm a big believer that speed is king. How long was it until you opened the next venue?
When I look back, it feels almost quite reckless. It was 11 months later, we opened a nightclub called Maggie's in Chelsea, and then a year later we opened Bunga Bunga in Battersea, and both those sites were sites no one wanted. And then a year later we opened Mr Fogg's in Mayfair. So, we were literally, and I remember it was all through cash flow, and we were having to take out quite a few credit cards to get through and have, there was 6 months where we couldn't pay ourselves, maxing out credit cards to be able to, it was just so squeaky to be able to do it. But somehow we kind of managed it. And Yes, so it was a quick run, and Maggie's was still going strong as a 1980s club, named sort of after Maggie Thatcher. It was a bit of a joke at the time, really. But there were so many, when we were thinking of a name for a 1980s club, there's so many people who were famous in the 80s who were as famous in the 90s or the noughties, like Madonna, or other sort of, Adam Ant was famous in the early 80s, but had gone by the end of the 80s, that kind of new romance movement. But Thatcher was there from 79 to 90, so she really did epitomise that period, and it was kind of still amusing. But when you're a small company, you need to get that PR mileage, and it made page 3 of the Standard, page 9 of the Guardian. We were getting mainstream media about this small nightclub in Chelsea, which meant we sort of packed a big punch, and meant we could spread the word. And this was, interestingly, when we opened Bart's the year before, it was just as Twitter was taking off, and that was a big thing, because we never gave the address to Bart's. It was like a secret speakeasy bar, and there was always these clues on Twitter. And as it was, and then with Maggie's, there was no Instagram then, so the mainstream media was more important to us, and we only played 80s music. We had her speeches playing in the loos. It's interesting, our loo attendant didn't know who she was when we launched, and he's now kind of an expert on her foreign policy. And it's been good fun. And interestingly, now I thought we'd be rebranding, 90s club. I thought it'd be Tony's by now, but the 80s music has never been so popular, and these 25-year-olds are just loving it.
22 years with a co-founder. How do you manage that? How do you keep the partnership strong and the relationship strong?
I think it's through trust and respect, actually. It's funny, Duncan and I are now as close as friends with godfathers to each other's children, but we started as business partners, not as friends, which is quite a difference. And I think it's also finding someone who is good at the thing, recognizing the things you're not good at. Duncan will obsess about how a bar's laid out and ergonomics of a room. Halfway through that meeting, I'm fast asleep. Whereas I'm obsessing about the antiques we've got on the shelf and the customer experience. So it's finding that dynamic that works with the two of you. And I think it's trust, respect. It's also knowing, Duncan puts his foot down about something. I take, I'll back down, and likewise. And it's interesting, like emails come in, and I don't even have to say that's for you, that's for me. We just kind of know. We have that relationship now that we can we know each other's areas of the business.
If we were to go back when you were starting Bart's, imagine you're starting Bart's, and 6 months later, COVID happens. What would you have done in that moment?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think COVID at that stage. I mean, the tragic thing is there are a lot of businesses that were wiped out by COVID. Restaurants that hadn't launched yet. They hadn't even opened, and we wouldn't have had the track record. We don't have investors, but we do have a commercial bank who was able to lend to us during COVID. So I'm not sure we would have survived, and that's the tragedy. There were so many great businesses wiped out by COVID, and COVID. Was not on any SWOT analysis. We thought about the worst case. You lose a license in a venue. If you don't have a license, you can't trade. Some incident happens, you lose a license. One venue gets wiped out. That was our kind of worst case scenario. But we never foresaw effectively over a year of no trade at all. So, in all honesty, I'm not sure we could have survived if that had happened then. We survived because we had to beg, steal, and borrow, basically.
Did you get into a lot of debt?
Yeah, I mean we did. I mean we had to. I mean, when we started getting it was interesting with the whole COVID story, because in February we started. It was like the canary in the coal mine. We started seeing it earlier than a lot of businesses, because we have a lot of international clients. So we do a lot with Google, for example, or Facebook, or companies like Amazon. They were doing conferences in London, and then they rent one of our venues. And there's a week in February called Oil Week, where we always do a couple of big events. And these companies were all starting to cancel. and it was just cancellation after cancellation. Companies who'd done events with us for 10 years on the trot were saying, no, we can't, we've got people coming from China or Italy, and it obviously hit China first and Italy next. And so we were starting to see some big corporate business cancel. Our retail customer was not behaving any differently at all. And I went to something called the Publican Awards on the first week of March, and everyone had their head in the sand. Everyone said this is not going to be a thing, and we were getting pretty worried at that point. And then I remember the weekend before, Boris sat down on that Monday at 6 o'clock and said, do not socialise, limit your time that you go out to clubs, bars, restaurants. He didn't lock the country down, but he just said, stop going. And we had spent that whole Monday in the meeting room sort of planning what to do, sort of trimming costs here and there, but it was scalpel stuff. And that was on the back of a weekend where we dropped 30%, which was huge. So the retail customers, only that weekend before, they'd acted completely normally, but that weekend before, we were 30% down, which was massive for us. And then he said, stop going out. And so we got back into that room and sat in there till 3 a.m. And we decided we had to close our venues. Even though it wasn't lockdown, we felt morally, everyone was scared at that point. They didn't know what this thing was. We couldn't send our staff into work. And so we decided to lock the venues down. And our CFO, who had started on the 1st of January, he poor guy, and everything we had sort of thought about doing in 12 months, we did in about 12 days, and we modelled the cash flow, and it was just horrendous when he modelled it, because you've got to remember, we were on 90-day terms, so we'd had a record Christmas in 2019. We'd also opened a new venue in November. Our bank wouldn't fund it because we'd done 3, so I took a bridging loan on my property to fund it. And then he we hadn't paid for that for our drinks bill because we had 90-day terms, so we hadn't yet paid for that. So if you just stop the clock there, we owed a lot of money looking back, let alone what we owed looking forward, which was always fine. It was always going to be fine if you keep trading, because it's just cash business. And we're lucky that we take money in hospitality before we've had to pay for our goods. That's just the way it works. So when I looked at that on the screen, I couldn't see a way through. And something people don't talk about a lot with COVID, or they don't realise, is we were quite lucky in a way of the timing of it, because it was early March. So what that meant was that we were coming up to the end of a quarter. So we used to owe all of our rents at the end of a quarter, paid in advance. If the same scenario, COVID, had happened a month later, the beginning of April, we'd have had virtually nothing, and it's a natural cash flow cycle, but we'd have had much less there. So thankfully we had our rents that were owed in the bank, because all I cared about at that point was, are your staff going to get paid? Because you can't suddenly not pay your staff. So we basically decided there and then every single direct debit has to be cancelled straight away, apart from, every direct debit was cancelled. We're like, HMRC are not getting a penny. Our landlords are not getting a penny. Our big suppliers are not getting a penny. All that we cared about was our small suppliers, who were basically, it was effectively living hand to mouth, and our staff. We had to get paid at the end of the month, and then it was sort of going to our landlords cap in hand. And I've got to say, our landlords, other than one, were fantastic, and every supplier we traded with before COVID, other than one, we still trade with now. So we made it through, and we did take more debt, but we've paid that debt back now. But it was a horrendously challenging time. It was it was an unimaginable crisis for a sector like us. There was no revenue, zero, and all we wanted really was, we didn't really want handouts. I remember when the government were giving these grants, and the reality is those grants were worth a good Saturday night. And I think from my perspective, I was very supportive of lockdown early on, before we had the vaccine. I thought it was an unknown, we had to do our bit. We had to stay at home. Personally, I felt towards the end it got to a point where we just should have been able to trade a bit earlier. And when the vaccine was in play, we needed to open up quicker. But it wasn't until April 21 that we saw traction. I mean, that whole summer, the whole our whole lifeblood, our whole ecosystem is people going to the theatre, it's people going to the office, and tourists coming to London, people travelling. That's the ecosystem. And without those three things, our venue, there was no point really in opening. So the summer of 2020 was. I mean, I know some people are doing well with Eat Out to help out and all that kind of stuff, but that didn't help us at all.
How did you keep yourself sane? I mean, you don't come from an entrepreneurial background. If I was in that situation, my parents would have gone absolutely crazy on me. So how did you do that? How did you keep yourself sane, and how did you avoid stress?
Definitely didn't avoid stress. Also I had our daughter in June of 2020, so I had a crying baby at home as well. This is definitely the most stressful period of my life. Hopefully I'll ever have to go through. And yeah, I definitely, as I said earlier, it was the one time in my life my dad was kind of ringing my ear saying, you should have been a professional. I think actually Duncan was a massive support. And he was, if you look at the phonetic symbols of crisis in Chinese, it's danger and opportunity. And I definitely was probably more focused on the danger. He was more focused on the opportunity. So I spoke to him a few times and said, what are you up to? And he was looking around sites, which I just thought was completely insane, but turned out to be one of the best things we did. And we came out of COVID and grew quite quickly, which probably, if it wasn't for him, I certainly wouldn't have done. I was being much more risk averse, but I'm very glad he pushed me in that direction. Because I couldn't really see past it, whereas I think he always had a very clear vision that good times were going to come again. But in my head at that point, it was like we're going to be living in this world, sort of weird, socially distanced world forever.
Having so many venues, you must have seen a lot of things. Tell me a story that's memorable.
It's a big question. One of my favourite stories was in Maggie's. We had this guy called Rob Lamberti, who was a George Michael impersonator. And he was an unbelievably good George Michael impersonator. And he always used to get his hair cut exactly like George Michael. And he, had the look, but he also sounded like him and sung like him. And he came down and did a performance, and there were lots of people in there. And there was someone who was a big football pundit, and he was tweeting, this is one of those most special moments, I've ever had. George Michael's doing an impromptu gig. But the best story came the next day when a friend of mine rang me and said, Charlie, you've got to hear this. And he said, my PA has just turned up an hour late to work. And she said, Alan, I'm so sorry, but you'll understand when I tell you, George Michael is not gay. And what's more, he's so down to earth, he's staying in the Holiday Inn in Wandsworth Roundabout. So this guy, Rob, had taken this unsuspecting lady under the pretense of being George Michael. That I laughed about for quite a long time after.
What's your future plans?
I think we're going to carry on growing. We're opening a really exciting site in Borough Market. So Mr Fogg's, we're in Mr Fogg's City Tavern at the moment. We've got 9 within the Mr Fogg's brand. We've still got Bunga Bunga in Covent Garden. We opened the control room in Battersea Power Station. Bart's and Maggie's going strong. But for us, the next big site is Borough Market. We've taken a really cool space right in the centre of the market, so that's under construction at the moment. And then the next site will probably be out of London, so I think either this year or early next year. And I think we want to start proving that our business can work out of London. And we're looking at cities like Birmingham and Brighton, Manchester, but also looking internationally, some opportunities there. But I think that's really exciting. It's a new challenge, and someone said to me once, you've got to treat a new city almost like a new country, and really approach it in that way.
There's a lot of entrepreneurs here, and in the in the late night operating business, what advice would you give to those starting?
I think that the advice I always give to people wanting to start in hospitality is start small. You know, people sometimes come and they say, we've got this idea for a restaurant. We're looking at 11,000 square feet space, and I always say, well, you know, we kind of started. We proved that we could kind of do it by promoting, and then we started with a venue that was a former squash court. And it was quite easy to make Bart's look busy because it takes 60 people. So start small. I think, you know, I definitely say to people who want a food concept, start with a food truck. You know, the Pizza Pilgrim guys are good friends of mine, and they've done brilliantly. They've got 40 Pizza Pilgrims now, but they started on the back of a scooter in a market in Soho, and they've travelled around Italy. They've been to Naples, and they had that story, but they had that Instagram following. So suddenly, you know, they had 10,000 followers on Instagram. By the stage, they said, we're going to open our first restaurant. And that's the way to start. You've got to get that traction. You've got to get that following. I think you've just got to, you know, you've got to be prepared to do the hard work, and you've got to do something better than other people. I think something we always say is it can't just be a gimmick. You know, for us, we're quite heavily themed, but behind that is still a solid offer. You know, hospitality, not service. That's our kind of mantra. Service is a transaction. Service you can get from a vending machine. Service is how this glass gets to there. Hospitality is a way we make people feel. And that's kind of runs through the blood of Inception Group, and that's something so key. You know, I think as we enter this strange new era of AI and robotic automation, actually EQ is going to become way more important than IQ. And actually the thing I think we all realised in COVID is everyone was kind of sitting on their sofa ordering Deliveroo, and I think a lot of those businesses like Pizza Express haven't recovered because people realise they can get the Pizza Express pizza on their sofa, whereas actually people want to come to a restaurant where they can get that interaction, and that's what you're paying for. You're paying for that atmosphere, you're paying for that interaction with the staff. So I think remembering hospitality, happy staff, happy customers, and yeah, it's you know, hospitality is a tough sector. It's similar to my dad telling me not to go into medicine. I probably tell my kids, you know, don't go into hospitality. But it is, you know, there's nothing more rewarding than walking into a busy venue and seeing lots of happy people. And you know, we got a wedding invite last week from a couple who wrote us this lovely letter, who met in Mr Fogg's and are getting married, and I'm sure there'll be lots of Maggies and Bunga Bunga babies along the way as well. Maybe with a George Michael lookalike.
What prompts you to be part of the Jobs Foundation?
I think it's a very noble cause that Matthew and Georgiana are championing, and I think actually business for too long has been a dirty word, and actually I think it's really important that we can see that business can be a force for good. And you know, even with an incoming Labour government, I think Rachel Reeves realises that she can't pull the tax lever any further. The only way that we're going to get more money for public service is through the SMEs, and they are they're the driving force behind the economy. And you know, we need to be supporting businesses, and we need to be creating jobs. You know, Inception Group, we employ 500 people now. I'm very proud of that. And if we can keep growing, you know, within the next few years we'll be employing 1,000 people, and you know, that's what pays for. You know, I think Kate Nichols, who I think has been an amazing figurehead for our sector. She said currently, you know, as a sector in taxes, you know, hospitality pays for the police. Help us to expand, cut our VAT, and help us to grow, and we could also pay for social care. And that's the way to look at it. And I think, you know, ultimately we are generating the tax revenue through creating jobs that keeps the country ticking.
What does community mean to you, and how important is it?
Well, community, you know, as I said, within Bart's, you know, that was the real sense of community within our customers. And that's a lovely thing, but I think there's a big community within our staff as well, and we do a trip every year. We just got back from Valencia, where we take all of our managers away, and those sorts of trips, we go for 3 days, 2 nights, It's really nice to kind of speak to your colleagues away from the office, but it's key. I think people want to be part of something, and I think in terms of what motivates people, you've got to pay people fairly, but actually it's all the other things, and that sense of community and that sense of purpose that give people the drive.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I want to open up to the audience to ask any questions.
I'm not sure how far this is going to stretch, but
All good. Thank you, Vicky. Hello, my name is Carlo Weave. I'm the CEO of Prentico, an EdTech startup. You said that you've employed around 500 people. Have you employed any graduates or apprenticeships? Because I know that around Europe, hospitality is something that, especially if you're in France or Sweden, you only have to get a degree to work in a lot of these big places. Do you view your company to hire apprentices and graduates for what you do? Because if you would like to do that, I would happily help you, because I believe the future of our workforce is young people.
I think it's a really positive thing in a way that's happened the last few years, that hospitality is starting to be seen as more of a career choice. And actually, I think we're, as a sector, we're paying better now. I think the apprenticeship scheme is actually, we get this apprenticeship levy tax every year. It's completely unusable and unworkable. We can never find ways. It's effectively another tax, and we would like to use that to employ apprentices, but we're not really, as a sector, we're not really recognised as a skilled job choice. So it's tough to do, but I think we've got a long way to go. If you go to somewhere like Italy, you see the same waiters, waitresses, bartenders are there for a career. We've got a long way to go to really show people that hospitality can be a career, and it's something I would love to do more. But a lot of people see this as a job. They don't see it as a career. It's something to do between things, and that's something if we look at most of our general managers, they've come through the ranks. They've started as bartenders or floor tenders, and we've taken them to general manager. But that's something we're having to do internally. It's not really recognised, sadly, in the country. But hopefully, we can turn it that way.
I've got the microphone, so I've got a question. We've been to a few of your venues recently with One Club, and I would say your staff are excellent. What do you do in terms of training programs?
So we have 5 people now full-time in learning and development. So director of people, Julie, and a whole team. So yeah, people get taken all the way through our kind of learning development program, and that's learning some of the soft skills. Ultimately, we try and employ people with the right attitude. I think actually that's the key.
Do they have to look like Mr Fogg?
That always helps. Yeah, he's fantastic. But no, it's getting people the right attitude, and then we can kind of train the rest. But everything through the cocktail bar academy, and I think the reality is we're having to accept that we're taking people on probably with a lower skill level than we might have done 5 years ago.
But you're investing in it.
We're investing a lot in it. We have to.
Hi, Nick Taylor, Jobs Foundation. Quick question. Assuming Labour win the next general election, this one coming up, and you were with Rachel Reeves at number 11, and you could give her one policy for the hospitality sector, what would it be?
I was lucky. A friend of mine who is quite politically agnostic had a dinner that he arranged about a year ago, and I sat next to Rachel Reeves, and so I said it was all about, well, there were 2, but it's VAT, a lower rate of VAT, that was very effective, and business rates. Business rates are punitive, and this current government kind of came out with this big headline that they had sort of business rates were going down by a third. Our business rates here at the same time that headline nearly doubled. Our fixed costs in this building before we've paid a single wage are £600,000 fixed costs, rent and rates. It's crazy.
Hi Charlie, thank you for today. It's really useful. Thank you. So Gary Laybourne, I'm CEO of a sports social mobility charity, like my peer. We use apprenticeships. Set it up 12 years ago, but actually set up as an independent charity on the 1st of April 2020. So SNAP on stress, and also sport and physical activity sector with hospitality feeling the pain. It's almost cliche now, this whole what did we learn through COVID, but I am quite interested because a lot of my fundamental views of how I saw us as an organisation moving forwards changed because of the things that we learned. So whilst it was god awful and horrific, and obviously, like you said, a time that none of us, I don't think, would ever want to relive, it was actually a baptism of fire that wouldn't have changed now on reflection. And it's actually, we've come out of it doing more things positively because of it. And I just wonder, for you as a business operation, was it pressing pause and getting through, or did it actually change some of your fundamental beliefs?
Being completely honest, for me it was a game of two halves. Like the first half, I was just in shock, and I was just all about survival of our company. And the second half, which was probably by the time we knew we had liquidity from our bank, I was a lot better at kind of engaging in that sense of community. I think it made us really drill into our fixed costs and just really realising how those things can ramp up, and suddenly you cancel every single software subscription. And I realised that all these things like creep up. Someone sidelines you and says, look, this is a really brilliant new reservations thing where we get everyone, and someone else, this other thing. And I was making all these decisions in silos. And now those sort of decisions can't happen like that. They have to happen centrally. So it made me really a lot more obsessive about not having fixed costs, about variable costs. And actually, that was the big deal I did with all our landlords. We just went on to a 10% of turnover. So we said, look, they said, yeah, but what happens if it booms? You you recover, you're doing so well. Well, you're 10% of turnover. So if it booms, you do well. Then if it's empty, you get nothing.
A lot of trust with your suppliers to do that, though.
That was with the landlords. There was trust, but ultimately, it was interesting dealing with all of our landlords at that time, because we sort of talked them through it, and we said, look, if we're not, because one of the best things we had was our company, something our lawyer set up for us 13 years ago. We didn't realise how useful it would be at the time. Is all our sites are in separate companies, and that was something it was actually just for our audit was a pain every year, but it meant that we could walk away without bringing down the company, and that structuring was just so fortunate. But we had to walk the landlords through it and say, well, if we're not here, then you've got an empty site, and you're probably going to have it empty for a year, and then you're going to have to give someone a year's rent free, and then you're probably going to get 2/3 the rent we're paying, or just support us through these 12 months, and you'll have and as I said, nearly all of them did it. But I think these times make you more resilient, and it definitely for me has rationalised stress. Stuff I got stressed about before COVID, thought was a big deal. I'm now, like, once you've climbed Everest, it's like nothing is a big deal compared to it.
Hi there. So I'm Brad Crompton from Session Spirit, so from the supplier side of your world. So my question is, how have the marketing principles that you followed changed from your first venue launch to now, or is it just the channels that have changed?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think when you start your first business and you're in your early 20s, you're quite a lot more exciting, and I'm quite realistic to the fact that a new Mr Fogg's now opening is not as exciting as it was. You can't just send a press release out saying, the 9th Mr Fogg's is opening and expect page 3 of the Evening Standard. So we have to think things through in a different way. And so I remember we opened our 5th Mr Fogg's. I didn't just say, well, we're going to open a Mr Fogg's. What we did was I set a challenge for 2 people to travel around the world in 80 days, and that we would pay them £20,000 and for the whole trip. And we launched a competition, and we got a sponsor to pay for it, Bombay Sapphire Gin. And basically we launched it in August and said, like, this is £20,000 and a trip for 2 around the world in 80 days. They had to get a botanical from every continent, and they would make a gin with them when we got back. And that just went, we had 45,000 applications. We were on Good Morning America. It's just the best job in the world. It went everywhere. We went on to ITV main evening news, and it just shows you just sort of approaching it differently. So you have to work a bit harder. Us just opening a new bar was no longer exciting, but we had to think creatively about a different spin to get the same message out. But definitely we've evolved from Twitter to Instagram, and now, TikTok is undeniably, it's a search engine. TikTok is a young people don't find things on Google, they find things on TikTok.
The botanical thing. The 80 days.
A lot of the best ideas, which is nice, are not from Duncan and I anymore. They're from our team, and we've had interns who joined us. But it was a sort of, I think, to be honest with you, there was an island in the Great Barrier Reef that did something similar, like come and be a caretaker for this island, the Great Barrier Reef, get paid 100 grand to do it, and that was the seed of the idea. And then we adapted it in our own way. And August is always a good time to launch a news story because it's pretty quiet.
I'm Jonathan from Print to Go. So you mentioned about AI and automation earlier. So how are you using tech and automation and AI to grow your business?
The honest answer is probably not enough. I think our CRM system is getting better in terms of customer profiling and tracking visits. We're also looking at a system at the moment that integrates with our CCTV in a GDPR compliant way that can measure entrance, can measure how long it takes people to get served, and all that kind of thing, which is quite useful data. And this is actually the pilot site here. So we're using it in ways. So it's interesting, like a lot of the tech stuff, like QR codes for menus and things. Personally speaking, I don't really like it. I think that becomes service, not hospitality. People staring at their phone and not interacting with staff. But then I do think it's great to be able to pay a bill that way, because by the time you finish your night, you just want to go. You don't want that extra 20 minutes. You just want to pay your bill and go. So it's using technology sensibly without ruining the hospitality. I think sometimes, for a QSR restaurant, you just want to get in and out, and it's all about just having that burger. Technology can be more effective, whereas I think for us to convey our theme and convey what we're doing, we don't want to fully go that way.
Hi, my name's Tamsin. I run an app which helps people find their friends inside busy venues. I wanted to know sort of what your advice, it's a very generic question, but what your advice to sort of a young entrepreneur would be, if you could give a lesson to your younger self. And also about like your optimism for the future in terms of like bouncing back, like sort of the world bouncing back after COVID and hospitality bouncing back.
Well, as I said, I think at one point, I think it's great to be a young entrepreneur, and I think I personally don't agree with the advice that you've got to go and have your career and then set up a business. I think the later you leave it, the harder it gets to do it. And I think it's all about taking. You've got to take risks, believe in what you do. I always say to our staff that if you don't believe in what you're doing, how can you expect other people? And I think belief is quite infectious. And if you are so committed to this as a great thing, other people will follow you. I think in terms of, probably one of the big learnings I've had in COVID is that cash was king. I think I hadn't quite realised what that meant before COVID, that profit didn't matter, it was just cash, and so many great businesses go under because they don't have enough cash. And I think that is a lesson I think everyone's kind of nodding their heads, but would agree with, and for a young business that's absolutely key. In terms of optimism, I think we're kind of at rock bottom right now. I think the interest rates are punitive, and it's interesting. I was talking to someone who runs a travel business, and they've literally got their worst year on record in terms of villas at the moment. It's like they've been going for 20 years, and like they just cannot let these villas. So I think people are really feeling the pinch, and there's been a bit of a lag because people have been coming off fixed rate mortgages. I think 200,000 people a month. So I think as soon as rate cuts start coming in, sort of post-election, I think we'll be for us, like train strikes has been a massive hurdle. Like a city venue like this on a train strike week, we were sort of 60% down, and 1 week like that a month kills your profit. So personally think Q4 this year, things will start bouncing back and looking better.
Thank you. I hate these things. My name is Edward Freeman. I'm an entrepreneur and property developer. In the spirit of, I love your energy, I love your optimism about hospitality bouncing back. I think it will be the last industry to go, and it will be the first to be revived from the ashes, because people love to be looked after. If Rachel Reeves waved her magic wand and gave you 100% rates relief for a year, and you suddenly had 1 or 2 million quid to do something with, but you weren't allowed to open a 10th Mr Fogg's, what would you do with it, with your group? What would you like to explore more?
I think it's something which we're doing a lot at the moment. I could do more of. It's reinvesting in your current estate, and I think that's something people don't do enough. I think when we launched our business 15 years ago, we had a mission statement to create unique and memorable experiences, and we saw experience being front and center. Now the word experience is quite overused probably, but I think we've got to keep taking that further. It's like I always use the Blockbuster analogy, but Blockbuster died a death, whereas Blockbuster should have been in the prime position to evolve to Love Film and then eventually to Netflix. But they thought forever and a day people were going to walk 10 minutes to the local video store and collect a video and walk up the hill with their video and get charged £10 a day when they didn't return it. And we'll be telling those stories to our kids, and they'll look at us like we've got three heads. But they had the opportunity to evolve, and we've got to keep evolving and keep adding. And I think we're looking at how we can. There's this whole phase of competitive socialising now. People don't want to go out and just drink, and I'm finding that more and more with companies now. That's not enough. Just having a busy bar, a free bar, come and get slaughtered on a Tuesday. They need more than that. So that's something how can we add that element of competitive socialising in an analogue Foggsian way in some of our venues, and that's something with the incremental gains within the existing estate and investing in our people. There's we've got a shopping list of. I have a staff forum where my business partner and I sit with a member of staff from every site, kind of a bartender or a floor tender once a quarter, and things that are important to them, like was staff food, because we don't have kitchens in every site, to having a nutritious staff meal. And that was a massive investment for us. It's easy in the sites where there's a chef, but for sites there's not, we've had to get a third-party provider. And I've got a wish list, like I'd like a really good comms tool, and then a great way to be able to speak to every member of staff. And each one of these things is kind of a few $100,000 a year, so it'd be kind of ticking off more things from that shopping list.
Hi there. Sam Murillo. I come from the venture capital world, and I'm always asked, do you prefer solo founders or co-founder partnerships? And very often, co-founders fall out, and very often, solo founders struggle. So the question is, what is the biggest row you've had with your co-founder, and how is it resolved?
I know that it sounds hard to believe that I really can't think of big rows. We have ideas that evolve. Like, so we had this venue called Cahoots in Soho, and I was absolutely adamant I wanted it to be a tube station. I was like, this is underground. We're always about turning a disadvantage into an advantage. So our hidden bar in Chelsea Cloisters was a speakeasy. Had no on-street presence. There was no way of people seeing it from the street. So we said, we'll make it the secret bar, turn a disadvantage into an advantage. And I love this idea of Cahoots. It was underground. It has to be underground, a tube station. So let's create a tube station. So we created this tube station bar 10 years ago. There's just a sign outside saying to the trains. We probably get 30 tourists a day trying to find their way home. And Duncan was obsessed about doing this 1940s idea. He's like, Blitz, post-war. And we ended up opening a 1940s tube station. but things do evolve quite like that with us too. We kind of, he has one idea, I have another idea, and we kind of merge them. And yeah, I think there's so much trust and respect. You know, as I said, I'm probably, if he's really adamant about something, I listen, and if I am, he does. But usually we adapt and we evolve, and as a company, as I said, that some of the best ideas now are not our own, which is really nice. Like people really junior who've just joined the company come up with genius things, and I'm always asking, because I'm realistic now. Maggie's, I'm not the target market, so, and nor am I in Bunga Bunga. So I'm always asking younger people in the office, would you like that? Do you like that? Would you pay that? You can't dictate to them what they would like. Whereas probably in a Mr Fogg's in Mayfair, I feel like I am the target market, so I have more of a say.
We're down to the last question, so it better be a good one. No pressure.
Thank you. My question is, you've spoken a lot about the growth of the different venues. So how do you differentiate between the churn and the growth, and which venues have you churned? Why? Are you quick at adapting to the market?
So by churn you mean
closing down?
We haven't really. We've only really ever done that in terms of closing down. When I'm talking about reinvesting, it's evolving. There's only one venue that we've closed down and reopened, and we opened a club in Soho in 2014 called Disco, and we thought we'd recreate Maggie's in Soho, and I think it was a real lesson that Maggie's was a one-hit wonder, and it couldn't be replicated. And it's just one of those big lessons, actually, I would say I learned, is when something's not getting traction and it's not getting momentum, don't keep spending all your time flogging it. It's like the 80-20 rule. You can spend 80% of your time, trying to get 20% of things to work, and it just was not working. And everyone was focused to try and make this disco club busy, but it was becoming such a distraction. It was becoming so demoralising. So we just said, 9 months in, we just knocked it on the head, and it was very painful because we'd spent a lot of money setting up this club, and I had to see everything being ripped out and chucked in a skip. And we opened Cahoots, and that has been one of our biggest successes, probably our best performing site in the group. So good can come out of bad, but I think you just have to sometimes know when it's not working. And then in terms of new venues, yeah, we're growing steadily. So sort of 2 or 3 a year is kind of our mantra. So so this year we'll open Borough and probably one other, and then maybe 3 next year. So I think we're trying to grow, in a manageable way. And that's the nice thing about not having investors. We've got no pressure. We can grow at the rate we want to.
Thank you so much. A round of applause.